Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. We begin today talking about forage and how OSU researchers are looking at ways to extend grazing times by sowing wheat into already established Bermuda pasture. Here's SUNUP's Curtis Hare and our Extension Forage System Specialist, Dr. Alex Rocateli.
Well, for the past 8 or 10 months or so, Dr. Alex Rocateli has been looking at a way to extend the grazing period. So Alex, the last time we talked to you had interseeded wheat into Bermuda grass fields. So how's that research coming along?
Yeah, as you can see, when you talk about interseeding wheat in Bermuda grass, it really can work, right? Last fall was very difficult for the wheat to come up and really catch growth for grazing. But during the spring, look, into Bermuda grass, turn out a good stand. Of course, it's not as good because it's much more difficult to interseed into a sod, in a Bermuda grass sod, but we really get a reasonable stand. Right now, the wheat is heading out, so it's the perfect time if you're thinking about haying. Of course, if you would go for grazing, you could start much earlier, or even during the fall if you had enough forage. But if you're thinking about haying, that's the right time, because on the heading is when we achieve the maximum yield that crop could do it, and also the quality is still pretty good.
And it's also important, to start that now because Bermuda grass is probably going to be coming out of dormancy.
Exactly. As you can see here in our plot that we have just the Bermuda grass growing, the Bermuda grass is start to green up. So that would be the right time to really finish it up, terminate that wheat, so your Bermuda grass can kind of be exposed to the light and start to grow aggressively.
So it wasn't just wheat that you tried as well. You also tried to interseed oats into Bermuda grass. So how did that turn out?
Oh my, yes. First, what we did was on that plot, as you can see there, first we stockpiled Bermuda grass. So we could have like the stockpiled Bermuda grass for December, and then we pretty much simulated the graze, cleaned it up, all that stockpiled Bermuda grass, and we planted oats in February last year, mid-February. But remember, after that will come all that snow. So it was very difficult to get a oat stand this year. And what I had learned is, right after that the snow melts and was starting March, we'd start to grow with the oats, that competition. And now that we could control some of the broad leaves that was coming up on our interseeded oat, the Bermuda grass start to also break dormancy and compete with the oat. So looks like that oats, it's a little more tricky during the spring to really interseed into Bermuda grass.
So Alex, you're looking at extending that grazing period, but is that something that's, producers are going to be able to do continuously year after year after year, or is there going to be maybe fallow periods in there?
Well, that is one of the questions of this research, and I think that the question will change where you are in Oklahoma. I would say if we are more in the east, we have more rainfall, and I believe that the rainfall is key here. And so we might have water enough. When you start to move a little more west, that's where things might become a little tricky, because perhaps we don't have all the rain that will be supplying water for year after year of those two crops going one after the other. So perhaps we may need to interseed one year, skip the other. That's why I have those pipes there that measure soil water down to 1.5 meters on different soil layers, because this water relation on just Bermuda grass with interseeded oats or wheat, that's where I want to see how that changes.
Well, we look forward to seeing some more of your research in the future.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very exciting.
All right, thanks, Alex. Dr. Alex Rocateli, Extension Forage Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Hi, Wes Lee here with the Mesonet Weather Report. Last week brought Oklahoma some of the severe weather that we have come to expect in the spring. On Tuesday night, thunderstorms formed a long train that extended across south-central Oklahoma and down into Texas. This event brought with it severe weather in the form of a tornado in the eastern part of Garvin County around midnight. These clouds didn't move much north or south and dropped a tremendous amount of rain over the area in a short period of time. This 5-day rainfall map from Wednesday shows just how heavy some of these amounts were. Most of the rain fell during the early morning hours on the 28th. The heaviest total shown here is from Pauls Valley with nearly 7 inches, but 5+ inches fell from Waurika all the way up to Westville. Unfortunately, the driest parts of the state, the western tier of counties, plus the Panhandle, received very little during this storm. You can see areas of the state where we need the rain the most when looking at the soil moisture maps. This 10-inch fractional water map of Wednesday afternoon shows dark green where recent rainfall has fallen. However, out west, the yellows indicate dry conditions at this depth, and the red color along with the 0 reading in the Panhandle is as dry as our sensor can read. Gary's up next with some summary April rainfall data.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, I have good news and bad news. We have drought on the run across to southern Oklahoma where we get all that rainfall this week. Unfortunately, it may have just moved to another part of the state. Let's take a look at the newest Drought Monitor map. Especially over in south central Oklahoma, we should wipe out quite a bit of these colors in the next Drought Monitor map that comes out next week. Unfortunately, you see all that new yellow up from west central into northwest Oklahoma, including all the Panhandle. That's the area that's really missed out on rain, not only for this week, but really much of the month. So let's take a look at those rainfall maps from the Oklahoma Mesonet and see where we stand. Okay, what you see here, the rainfall for April, really I-44 seems to be the dividing line between really heavy rains, and then as we get farther to the northwest, we really drop down fast into the less than an inch as we get out into west central and northwestern Oklahoma. The deficits are really starting to mount as we get into spring, deeper into the spring at least. We see deficits from 1 to 2 inches, even greater as we get into northwestern Oklahoma. And then we see the surplus amounts as we get into the southeastern half of the state. Again, just as we get to the southeast of I-44. On the consecutive days with less than a quarter inch of rainfall, we do see up across northwestern Oklahoma, even parts of western Oklahoma, well over a month without at least a quarter inch of rain in a single day. And then, of course, as we go to the east, those days are basically down to 0. So I have been saying we get into the meat of spring and we might see that drought start to erase. Unfortunately, it has to rain everywhere or that drought will come back in other parts of the state. So we still have hope, at least while we're in spring, that we can start to alleviate those drought concerns as we get up into northwestern Oklahoma. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
We're joined now by Dr. Saleh Taghvaeian, our Extension Water Resources Specialist. And Saleh, you have some updates for us on irrigation and water resources to share today.
Yes, when we think about water resources for irrigated crops, we have to start with soil moisture because soil and the root zone is really our storage tank. That's where we want to keep water for the crops to use. So I looked at the Mesonet percent plant available water maps this morning. For the top 4-inch layer of the soil, I see a lot of values less than 20%, especially in the Panhandle. In the western part of the state, southwest, central west, you also see values in 20s, 50s, 60s. That tells me that for that top 4 inches, we're still not where we would like to be in terms of soil water availability. And then when you look at the top 16 inches, I still see some low numbers. Now there are 2 ways to replenish soil moisture. We can naturally replenish that by rainfall, or we can add irrigation water.
So what does the irrigation data show you right now as we're kind of at this point in spring?
In Oklahoma, about 85% of our irrigation water comes from groundwater resources. We have 3 major regions in terms of groundwater access: the Russia Springs Aquifer, the Ogallala Northwest, and the Ogallala Panhandle. As you move from Russia Springs in West Central and then to Panhandle with Cimarron, Texas, and Beaver counties, the depth to groundwater increases as we move that direction. With the Russia Springs Aquifer, we typically see fluctuations in depth to groundwater from 64 feet to about 70 feet. And this year we're in that range, so it's not that different from previous years. When we move on to Ogallala Northwest, it's the same story. It's like other years. With the Ogallala Panhandle, we see a continuous decline year after year, and it's on average about a foot per year. So the latest number I checked for that Texoma was about 240 feet from the soil surface. That's with groundwater resources. We also have surface water available to growers within the Lugard Altus Irrigation District. Lake Altus levels are lower than they usually are. I checked this morning and the reservoir storage is near 36,000 acre feet. That's the fifth smallest storage reservoir when you go back all the way to 1991. So we sure hope that we get more runoff in May. However, the forecast so far does not suggest that it's going to be above normal forecast.
Guidance for producers, I mean, this is great information, but what do producers have a responsibility to do given some of the limited availabilities depending on where they are?
I have two recommendations for our growers. One is, if you haven't already done so, check your irrigation systems. Just do a comprehensive check. Start with the pump, start with the water source, check the pump, check the motor or engine, check the control and power boxes. If you inspect the system now, it could save you downtime, hopefully in the middle of the growing season. The second recommendation I have for them is to monitor the irrigation applications, especially early ones, and the soil moisture, because in a year like this, we may think that we have to provide all the water when we can, and that could result in preventing the root system from developing extensively. If we end up with a lazy root system because we've provided more water at the beginning, and then when things got hot and dry and groundwater levels dropped, we could not provide that water anymore, the roots are not there to extract water and nutrients from lower levels of soil.
And last but not least, you have some fact sheets that people can access online.
Yes.
Okay, great. We will look for those. Good to visit with you, as always. And for a link to the irrigation fact sheets, go to sunup.okstate.edu.
Parts of the country are starting to really dry out. Derrell, how is that impacting the agricultural markets like the cattle markets?
Well, I tell you, the western U.S. has got tremendous drought problems. Some parts of the west, the southwest in particular, have been in drought most of last year, and they continue to be. Other areas are just getting really bad in just the last month or two. The time of year is what makes this so critical right now. We're going into May. It's growing season. What happens in the next 6 weeks or 2 months is going to determine much of the fate for the rest of the year. So it's a critical deal. You look at areas like North Dakota, some parts of Texas are getting drier pretty quickly. Again, much of the West really have been dry for a long time. So we could see some significant impacts here in just a couple, 3 months pretty quickly.
How are we looking as far as the drought picture in cattle production in Oklahoma?
Oklahoma is in considerably better shape, and it's springtime and we're acting like we're going to get some spring weather, so at least intermittently we're going to get some moisture. But the last drought monitor had about 50% of the state in abnormally dry conditions, so no severe drought anywhere in the state. But the point is it could get dry pretty quickly. So it's still something we need to keep an eye on. If we get the rains that we kind of expect at this time of the year, we're not going to have a problem. But, again, you just never know. It could turn around fairly quickly.
Can't believe that we're already looking at May, but how are we looking as far as the grilling season into, say, throughout the summer?
The demand side looks really strong right now. We've had a tremendous run up in boxed beef. stronger than I expected, frankly, even though it's the time of year we expect that sort of strength, as we are doing buying for, Memorial Day. Actually, we got Mother's Day ahead of that, and we got more restaurants open now. A lot of mothers will probably be getting some dinners out this year. So, all of those things look very positive right now.
And just briefly, kind of contrast that with a year ago at this point, whenever the restaurants were shutting down, whenever the direction of beef was kind of changing.
Well, we had two things going on this time of the year last year. We did have the shutdown, so we had basically half of the market shut off at this point, with the food service side completely out of the picture. All of the demand was piled onto the retail side. That created some bottlenecks in demand and so on. And at the same time, right now in April is when we began to see the COVID impacts in packing plants and those sort of things. We had a reduction in beef production throughout the month of April last year, and then on into May before it recovered. And so we had shortages of product, we had disruptions in supply chains. All of those things at this point, I think, are behind us, thankfully.
Thankfully. Well, let's take a look at the cattle markets. Where are we at?
Well, the cattle markets have struggled a little bit here lately. Fed cattle markets have really had a tough spring. Frankly, we've had a hard time putting together a sustained rally. We did get a little bit of a rally, and we're kind of pulling back a little bit from that now. There's been lots of cattle available, basically just a big pipeline of cattle. And combine that with the fact that actually the packing plants are essentially full right now. We're pretty close to capacity. So they don't have the ability to process any more cattle, and again, we've had an unusually large supply here. Feeder cattle markets were very strong earlier in the spring. They've pulled back a little bit. Right now, the biggest thing affecting feeder cattle markets is the fact that grain prices have just shot through the roof. For the last several months, but especially in the last couple of weeks, we've seen that. And so that's putting a lot of pressure on these feeder cattle markets.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
I think most of us remember the cold Arctic air that we all felt back in February, and I know that cattle producers suffered some losses. During that time, I heard stories about cattle falling through the ice and drowning, and that some newborn calves actually froze to death. But an issue that you may or may not be aware of is that we may have some problems with bull fertility following that cold spell. In a study that was performed in Canada, bulls that had frostbite lesions had reduced quality semen when they were examined on a breeding soundness exam. This study suggested that the cause of this was inflammation in the testicles, and that increased the temperature of those testicles. When we have changes in temperature in testicles, it will damage those sperm cells as they mature, and you'll have problems with motility, or you may actually also have problems with morphology, abnormal sperm developing. So, with this information in mind, it should be highly suggestive that all bulls get tested before you turn them out this spring. In a typical year, most cattle producers, only about 20% of them will get their bulls tested before they turn them out for breeding. This is an unusual year, and I would highly suggest that producers get their bulls tested this year before turning them out. A breeding soundness exam is going to cover three things. It's going to look at the physical part of the bull, make sure that he's physically sound. It will examine the reproductive organs, and then it will examine the semen and make sure that it has good motility and that the morphology is normal, that we have mostly normal sperm in there. So I know the cold weather is long gone, but the after effects of it still may be lingering. If you want to be confident that your bull has the potential to breed those cows, be sure and get a breeding soundness exam performed this year. If you'd like more information about breeding soundness exams in bulls or about the consequences of cold weather on bull fertility, just go to sunup.okstate.edu.
Good morning, Oklahoma. This week on Cow-Calf Corner, we're going to discuss the benefits of estrous synchronization at the onset of breeding season and the potential benefits of artificial insemination and how they can work to our advantage in trying to improve profit potential. So first, some topics that we get into anytime we're thinking about going into breeding season. It's always beneficial to get as many of our cows bred early in breeding season as possible. It is going to result in more calves coming early in that following calving season. And when we wean, we're going to have a set of older, heavier, more uniform calves. If we have older, heavier, more uniform calves, it makes it possible for us to better implement management practices, herd health, vaccinations, concentrate our efforts of labor into shorter time frames. And so there's always upside and additional profit potential in doing that. So when we talk specifically about estrous synchronization, if we do that going into a breeding season, the big upside for us, if we go out and we've got those females that are 45 days to 2 months postpartum, if we begin a synchronization program at the point we're ready to begin breeding or turning out bulls, we see a higher percentage of females coming in initially in those first few days. And so if we're breeding natural, or specifically if we're checking heat for the sake of doing AI, we can concentrate our heat detection into a few days there. And even those cows that don't conceive are going to remain synced up to a degree, so that even within the first 18 to 25 days of breeding season, we're going to see more return heats on those. So if we're checking heat for the sake of AI, it concentrates our labor into shorter time frames, and we're not out there continuously checking heat over a couple months or potentially 3 months. And so the upside is more of those cows get an opportunity to get serviced within the first 3 weeks of a breeding season, which relates to more calves coming in a timely fashion that following calving season. The other upside, if we're going to go to the time and expense of estrous synchronization, is it permits us to use artificial insemination, or using bulls that have got more genetic value for traits that are economically important to us than we could necessarily get with just natural service sires. And so that's kind of the other advantage that folds in to estrous synchronization, is potentially catching those cows and doing some AI work on them, at least in the early stages before we may turn out a bull to breed natural service. As Dr. Whitworth mentioned earlier in the show, we feel like breeding soundness exams on our bulls are going to be really important this year, relating back to that extreme cold snap that we had through the month of February. And so as we think long term, defined breeding seasons permit us to manage better. If we can synchronize estrus at the beginning of breeding season, we end up seeing more calves born earlier that following calving season, which increases our profit potential. Appreciate you joining us this week. We'll see you next week on Cow-Calf Corner, and in weeks to come, we're going to get into specific synchronization programs, and we'll be addressing that as we get a little bit later in the spring.
Well, the grain markets were on a tear. So Kim, what's happening right now?
Well, we just got prices going up. You look in the last week, you've had wheat prices go up about 75 cents. Cash Oklahoma prices from around $6.25 to almost $7. Corn prices from about $5.20 to $5.50, somewhere in that vicinity. Sorghum from $6 to $6.30. Soybeans from $12.40 to $12.75. Cotton from $84.41 to $87.02. All the commodities are just going up big time.
And soybeans just keep going up. So how high can prices go all around?
Well, that's the rumble in the market. You know, that's what the analysts are, how high can these prices go? And some of them say that if you look at the supply and demand situation, they're as high as they should be. But when the market gets moving, when the momentum gets there, you just don't know how high they're going. Plus, there's a lot of things going on in the market right now.
So what are those things that are causing all this?
Well, if you look at the wheat supply in the United States, hard red winter wheat especially is relatively tight. All wheat stocks are relatively tight, even though the world stocks are record-ending stocks. So you got tight milling quality wheat prices. You've got Argentina. The rumor is that they're going to put a tax on exporting wheat. Russia's already got an export tax on their wheat. And you look at the countries around the world. You've got South Korea, you've got Vietnam, you've got China. The top 3 corn importing countries in the world are switching from feeding corn to feeding wheat. And that's the rumor in the United States, that feed mills, feedlots are switching to wheat. to mix in the feed rather than corn. I think what's going on in the market right now is the market is trying to buy corn acres, soybean acres, cotton acres, and when that gets bought, then we'll see what happens.
So say like I'm a wheat producer and I'm coming to you and asking you for advice, Kim. So what should I do?
Well, when you're looking at $6.90 wheat, I throw it back at you. What do you think you should do? Your average price on a 10-year average may be around $5.35. Your 5-year average is below $5, and you got the opportunity for $6.90. Now, you may want to go in and put a bottom on that. You can buy an out-of-the-money put option contract, say around $6.60. It's going to cost you about 30 cents. So that'll give you $6.30 minus a minus 15 basis. So that's going to give you around a $6.15 minimum price. So you may want to look at doing some things like that.
So now I'm going to put my corn and soybean hat on. So what should I do there?
Well, the market chatter is that corn prices are leading the market right now. Corn ending stocks, the projections are going down. You don't know how high it's going to go. If you hadn't priced any, probably now's a good time to price some. You can also come in and buy the floor with the puts on the corn. Soybeans are really tight. Rumor this week was that the United States is going to import some cargoes of soybeans from Brazil.
All right, thanks, Kim. Dr. Kim Anderson, grain marketing specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Thanks so much for joining us this week for SUNUP. Remember, you can find us anytime on our website and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at SUNUP.